Thanks, everybody. Thank you. I'm Ricky Camilleri. I'm your host of Build. Our next guest is a beloved comedian and actor who you've seen in shows and movies like The Jim Gaffigan Show, Experimenter, Chappaquiddick, and now he's playing a really tough man to like in the new Being Frank. Let's take a look.
Mom, why not?
Because I know the things that happen on spring break.
What, kids of overprotective parents get to reclaim a moment of sanity?
Minors get high and smoke weed.
I agree with your mother. Looks like I have to leave first thing in the morning for Japan.
Feeling that itch, huh?
You think I enjoy being out of town for weeks on end?
He'll never let you go.
Maybe I don't need his permission.
This is our last spring break ever.
I'm tired of my dad telling me what I can and can't do.
Spring break!
Dude, that's my dad. How did he find us?
I don't think it's you he's looking for. Men your father's age cheat to make themselves feel younger.
She's our age. How young is he trying to feel?
My woman, my woman, my...
He's not just cheating. It's a second family.
You finally found your dad's kryptonite. You can get anything you want from him.
Should ask for a Trans Am. Trans Ams are cool.
Is your father home?
You've met my dad.
We go way back.
Your mom is a really good cook, isn't she?
She is.
Hard to believe that we keep missing each other after all these years.
Souvenir?
My dad got that in Japan.
Funny, I have the exact same one.
No way.
Way.
Oh, it's so good to be home.
Told you he'd be surprised.
What are you doing down here? We're up here. Why are you here?
Spring break.
There's two sides to every story.
So it seems.
He's not here for spring break. He could really use a father like you.
You're blackmailing me? I hope you're having fun.
Hey, Allison! I don't think she heard me.
You weren't very loud.
Should I be louder?
No.
You got Grandma Ruth's car?
Is this your car?
It is.
That's awesome.
It's Bush League, man.
I'm sorry, I don't know all your covert rules.
Rule number 1, only offer information when asked.
What's the holdup?
Having little man talk.
Sports, drinking, strippers.
Rule number 2, when asked a question, always answer with a question.
Here's one. What's gonna happen when you get caught? I don't even recognize you. It's like you're two different people.
Think this is my first close call? Trial by fire.
Like the Hindenburg.
Bad lie. Bad lie.
I didn't see that happen.
No, no.
It's a fun time.
Me too.
It's like kind of like I'm your accomplice.
Better than my extortionist.
Everybody, please welcome the great Jim Gaffigan.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you.
Thanks for coming back. It's good to see you.
It's good to be here.
My first question for you, how hard was it to make this character likable? Were you concerned with making him likable? And yeah, how difficult was that for you?
Well, I play a guy with two families that don't know about each other, so he's a good guy. Yeah, so that was the task. And when I read the script, I was thinking about how we all, like if we heard about someone who did this and we didn't know the person, we'd think they're a monster. But like when we have friends that do horrible things, we kind of attribute it to them going through something. So I realized that I wanted to make him human and not necessarily likable, but to build some empathy for him.
Was that difficult for you at all?
I mean, some of it's in the script, but I did feel as though the story that he explains, maybe he's not a genius, but like in his belief system, it made sense.
Yeah.
And I'm a coward, so I identify with being a coward.
How far will you go to not have to deal with confrontation?
I eat constantly. No, I would say...
Is that an example of your form of confrontation?
Yeah, I would say that there's...
No, but I think...
Yeah, here you are, food. Goodbye, emotion. No, I would say that I put off conflict and then I'm all in. Then I almost enjoy it. What I'm saying is I like conflict. No, I'm saying that... but I think in this movie, Frank is lying, but a lot of people in this movie are lying, and I think we all kind of live with secrets and lies, and some of those, some of them are worse than others, but, this movie culminates where he's confronted by everyone in one scene, which is very stressful. But I think we all kind of have these secrets. I know you have a lot of secrets.
I have a lot of secrets. There's a scene where your character is called a coward, but there is also a scene where he realizes just before where he's about to be confronted, but he realizes that a confrontation is most likely, and he kind of blows up in that scene and starts yelling at his son, and he's kind of yelling at himself and his son. And that was kind of the scene for me where I felt like that's this character. That's this man. Like, he does not actually want to deal with all of the people in his life because he cannot handle it in any way. What was your take on that moment? Because it's the moment where we see him scream at people.
Yeah. And I'm not a panic attack guy, but living in these moments as this character, I would kind of find myself in these panic attack moments where there's just it's inarticulable rage that kind of comes out of you in that moment. And so, because when I was reading it, I was like, you read a scene and you're like, on an initial reading, you're like, I don't know how this is going to play out. You obviously, as an actor, you don't want to be like acting, but you want to just live in the moment. So I didn't expect that I would have the outburst that I had.
Did you, I know this is a fairly low budget film, but did you guys shoot a lot of different kinds of takes and different emotions? Because they are scenes that could go a couple different ways depending on how you play them.
Yeah, I mean, we made a point of, I think a comedy that's grounded in reality is always better, but it was an ongoing discussion. So, because inherently, having more than one family and deceiving them is not funny at all.
But I mean, there's scenes where the son decides to blackmail him. Frank could be kind of hapless, and I think that's mainly kind of how you play him. He's a little hapless, and he's just trying to figure out how to figure this out. Or he could be, even with the same lines, a conniving dirtbag who wants to manipulate everybody.
Yeah, there was a balancing act, and we did different. We would shoot it, and then we would kind of do a take where there was improv. But some of it is it's up to the director to edit. I'll pitch ideas, but I've been on the other end where, as an executive producer of a show, you want an actor to show up with ideas and pitch them, but also understand that if the end decision is someone else's. What I'm saying is I'm a great person.
And that there's time restraints, and that there's budgetary there's all these things that sometimes actors don't necessarily take into consideration when they show up with all their ideas.
Yeah, and you have to show up, pitch your ideas, and also move on if the director or writer are not going along with it.
Was that ever something that, being a creative person of yourself, outside of just acting, you're a writer and a comedian, that you had to get used to when you started acting professionally? Get used to the idea that, there's only so much that they can give you in terms of what you're giving to them?
Absolutely. The whole idea of just even seeing how things are edited, you just have to, it's not up to you. So there's plenty of times where you'll see how they put together a scene, and you want to be like, don't do it that way, but you have to just be deferential to, that people have lived with. I mean, I love being a hired gun because also, being a comedian, when we were doing the Jim Gaffigan show, there were plenty of times where I was like, this is why I'm on stage by myself with a microphone, because there's just so many responsibilities. So,
what was the toughest part about being the EP of your own show?
There's so many moving parts. I mean, and I think as a comedian, you can be spoiled by, you're on stage, you're the writer, performer, and director. I mean, I work a lot with my wife, but the decisions are down to you. But then again, I do love being a piece in a larger equation. Like, I love acting. I love being just a participant in a moment. But having the authority of being an executive producer or even a writer and an executive producer is I feel like I like acting, I like stand-up, I like writing, but being in charge of the whole baby is not something I like.
Have you gotten to the point with, and I want to get back to being in charge of the whole baby in just a second, but have you gotten to the point with it where as an actor, you don't necessarily, obviously you care about the final product, but you don't have to see it. It's not really about that. It's about the process and about who you're working with?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not a fan of looking at myself generally.
Like I interviewed Willem Dafoe, and you know he's been in some of the greatest movies ever made, and delivers amazing performances. And there were numerous of them where I believe he was like, I never really saw that one.
Yeah,
because it was just about working with the director and the people that were on the set and delivering the performance. And honestly, it felt like sometimes if you watch them, it would take away from that experience.
Yeah, you can't be objective. You know, it's even as an actor, when you read a script and you don't get the role, watching that movie, you're like, oh, this is how they did things differently. You can't enjoy the movie as much as someone who's just kind of arriving at it.
Has there been a movie where you haven't been able to enjoy because you auditioned for that role?
Oh, yeah. No, well, there's been shows where... and it's not so much that I didn't enjoy them. I just wasn't dying to watch them. Right. And some of it is...
You weren't sitting there watching, you piece of shit. I could have...
No. It was... Some of it is just also, like, dealing with... There's so much rejection in the entertainment industry that you, in the end, you are in charge of your own mental well-being.
Yeah.
So, like... Look, I loved what I've heard about Arrested Development, but I tested for that show, and I couldn't do it because I had I think it was a guy, I think David Cross got it.
Okay.
And, but I couldn't go to the final test because I was committed, because I had tested for some other show. It's like, but everyone has these stories. So I didn't have any ill feelings towards it, but I just couldn't motivate myself to watch it.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because it was a thing that had gone past you, and it just like didn't work out.
Yeah, but
maybe that show took off, and the thing that you had tested for.
Yeah, they didn't even do it.
Oh.
You know what I mean? And so, but the entertainment industry is all about, the opportunity of a lifetime every 6 months. It seems like that, and you just can't put too much weight into it. As excited as I am for every opportunity, I've also been burned so many times that I'm like, hopefully less naive. But you also get suckered into it, and you're like, this is it.
Of course.
They're gonna deliver me to a room, and I'm just gonna be hanging out with Tom Cruise.
You don't want that.
No, I don't want
Hanks
that.
maybe, but yeah, I don't know about.
I'm gonna fight Tom Cruise. I'm gonna punch him.
It's weird. Do you have that urge?
Just because I'm younger.
Not specifically Tom Cruise, but these like extremely handsome, like tough leading men. Do you ever think, I wouldn't mind seeing what that's like?
I want to fight every attractive person. I feel generally as a culture, the way we worship beauty is repulsive.
Yeah.
I think it's, and by the way, that's also anger at myself because I'm a sucker for it too. Mm-hmm. But I just think we present ourselves as these intelligent beings, but in the end we're like, yeah, but she's pretty. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And it's just, we should be embarrassed. That's why I'm running for senator.
To demolish beauty standards across the senatorial campaign.
We live in this age where we're looking at privilege. And as a straight white male, I'm very conscious of the privilege that I've been given. But I think the beauty privilege it's overwhelming. Like, let's not deny it. It's like people are like, it's like if someone's good looking, they're getting to the front of the line. Yeah, it's not a metaphor for a club. It's reality. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Doors open up.
That's right. Yeah. And that's why I'm a social justice warrior.
Battling beauty standards. You said you don't enjoy being in charge of the whole baby. The Jim Gaffigan show ran for 2 seasons, or was it for 2 seasons?
Yeah, I think 2.
I
should know. Yeah.
When it wrapped up, was there a sense of was there a part of you that was relieved, or
yeah?
had you gotten used to
it was incredibly rewarding, but there's a lot of moving parts. Like, I'm the parent of 5 children, and that's way too much work. So like I love being a parent, and I love doing the Jim Gaffigan show, but particularly being a parent of 5 children, I was like, I can't do all this. You know what I mean? And some people are perfect for it. They have the mentality, but I'm much more of, before I go on stage, I'm looking at notes. Before I'm doing a scene, I'm obsessing on the character's motivation and what the lines are because I'm dumb. So it's like having like 30 things on my plate is not something that's necessarily appealing. The 30 projects is fine, but like being in charge of the whole shebang is not something I'm interested in.
If you had moved into more seasons, would you have tried to take more off your plate so that you could focus simply on the acting or the performance?
Well, my wife and I, we tried to do that, but the Jim Gaffigan show, it was so autobiographical, and it was about our lives, so we couldn't really outsource it because there were like aspects of it, like the character I played was Jim Gaffigan. The character that my wife was portrayed by, her name was Jeannie Gaffigan. So we couldn't be like, oh, in this episode, it's really funny because Jeannie has an affair. You know what I mean? We can't do that.
Right.
Whereas, but that's something we learned in hindsight. You know what I mean? And there were just like, there's biographical things that if you're writing about yourself, even in a fictitious way, there's kind of things that you're like, no, I don't want to say that. And so you end up writing it yourself.
And you didn't yet have like a writer that specifically, like, Tina Fey has Robert Carlock, who I feel like really knows her aesthetic and style and knows how to write for her. Did you feel like you didn't necessarily have, you and your wife didn't have that yet?
Well, it's not so much, there's very talented people, but it's not just a point of view or a style or a tone. It was too autobiographical. Like
Literally
it's like
your life. Yeah.
You're literally, all right, so she's the Catholic mom of 5, and like then someone else comes into it, and they're not gonna know what to write. And you're dealing with comedy, and it's very personal. So it was
like her mother-in-law comes to town, and Jim doesn't like her. You're like, no, I really like my mother-in-law.
Right, and so and by the way, that wouldn't matter if I was playing a fictitious character, but then my wife is like, how dare, because
your mother-in-law's like,
her mom's gonna watch this and go, what does this mean? You know what I mean?
Has stand-up throughout all of this, throughout being an actor and having your own show, has stand-up felt a little like a saving grace, like the thing that always sort of pulls you into a place that is comfortable and makes you fulfilled?
I would say, yeah. I mean, there is something about stand-up that is something so rewarding. And also, right before doing this movie, my wife was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and it was removed. And so there was a very touch-and-go moment where I thought for sure that I would be done with stand-up and acting, and I would be like a horrible single father of 5. But getting out of that window of panic, I had even a greater appreciation for the artistic outlet of stand-up and also for incredible acting opportunities. So, yeah, the stand-up is definitely something where when people say it's so amazing someone stays doing stand-up, or Jerry Seinfeld's going back to stand-up, I'm like, if you're a comedian, you have to do it. It's like, it's kind of how we process things. It's like there's something about the creative fulfillment as a writer, whether you're writing an article or a joke, you just feel better when you're done doing some of it.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, not all comedians. I feel like some comedians start as stand-ups and use that essentially as a stepping stone to a show or movies, and then they kind of leave stand-up behind, and maybe they come back to it. There's been a few who've come back later in their career, and it's a huge deal, but they're not regularly doing stand-up
I think
anymore.
it's probably unique to every situation. So I don't know what it was like to be Steve Martin at the peak of his career. It sounded like it was pretty horrible. You know what I mean? But or like even Dave Chappelle, like he couldn't go on stage without people yelling out bits. But for me personally,
he really had to kind of break that down by consistently going on stage and improvising for like 2 or 3 hours just to sort of make it, have everybody like around the country essentially expect the unexpected and not expect any of the old bits.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing I mean, stand-up's very much a conversation with the audience, and that's why it's important to come up with new material because everyone has that friend you just have the same conversation with, and they're great people, but you kind of get bored of that conversation. They're like, "Remember when we did that?" And you're like, "Yeah, I do remember that. Can we talk about something else?" So like the good conversations you have with friends are when they challenge you and you're discussing different topics.
When you're working on new material, are you essentially going on stage with a notepad and going over jokes that you're writing at home, or do you find that you get on stage and wing it and start developing material based out of those sort of early improvisations on stage?
There's, I would say that there's definitely comic ideas that I'll go on stage with, but I'm definitely not the type of person that just goes up there and wings it. And if I'm always touring, so if I'm doing a show in a theater, it's all A material. So I might improvise some lines or something, or maybe a moment here or there, but it's all tried and true. Like I remove the possibility for someone wasting their time. Less so much, obviously it's like going to a theater and seeing a show is expensive, or it can be expensive, but I think it's more about the time. So it's like there's efficiency in my writing, and I want everyone that shows up, because I have 5 kids. It's like you get only so many nights out, and you don't want to be like that's the night someone didn't have a good time.
Where do you go to create new material, to workshop material?
In New York. I live here in New York, so I'll always, I go up just about every night.
Really?
It's amazing. I can eat dinner with my family, and then I'll go out, do a spot, and I can be home by like 9.
If you don't do a spot for like 3 or 4 days, what does that feel like for you?
It feels like I'm suffocating.
Right?
I know that sounds kind of...
No, not at all. I don't do stand-up, but
my wife is like one of those, like, go do a spot.
Yeah.
So, like, even after 9/11, this shows you how old I am, but after 9/11, we were in our apartment, and I was like, I think I'm going to go and do a spot. And she's like, it's September 13th. Like, 9/11 happened 2 days ago. What are you doing? And I'm like, I have to get out there. And I went to the subway, and I ran into another comedian, and we just had to get out.
Wow.
Because that's some of, there's something very cathartic about being on stage and getting the endorphins going.
Yeah. I totally get that, though. Like, without having that one, like, I write, and if I don't write for like 4 days, I'm like, my partner has to be like, something's wrong with you. Like, you have to go write or something.
Yeah, of course.
You just start feeling really anxious.
Yeah.
Everything's pent up.
And there's something very rewarding about just even the nub of an idea.
Yeah. And just and seeing where it can go and how to flesh it out. Yeah. You have 5 kids, and you said so a couple years ago your wife was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and it was how long was the period between diagnosis and removal, and
It was a crazy kind of 1 month of like discovery to like but like it was it's like the tumor was the size of a pear on her brainstem, where all these cranial nerves like
the size of a pear.
Yes. So and it was where like the swallowing muscles, facial muscles. It was a pretty terrifying time. She had pneumonia. I mean, she wrote a book about it that's coming out, but so it is one of those things where in the moment of that and directly following it, you have all these, crystal clear priorities. You're like, being angry on the subway makes no sense. You don't know if someone's going through something. And then like 3 weeks later, you're like, get out of my way. It's like you're so spoiled immediately.
Maybe this is the wrong question. I'm not going to phrase it right, but what was it like to go through that in the midst of going through everything that we are in this country? Because I'm wondering how we prioritize those things, or are able to be like, actually, that does not matter at all. This matters.
Yeah, it's interesting, and my wife kind of addresses that in her book. But because there was a moment during all of this, because there was this terrifying time, and then there's this extended recovery period where it's not fun. Like everyone has spent a couple weeks in a hospital with a loved one, and it's a pretty kind of scary and weird time. But like during that time, news and reality. Like when my wife woke up after the surgery, there's the medical questions of like, all right, what's your name? Where do you live? Who's the president? And my wife was like, don't tell me it's Donald Trump. Do you know what I mean? So it's like,
Can I go back to sleep?
yeah. And so like, and so it is interesting because there was a time where like I remember, and some of it is I'm a news junkie and I find it fascinating. It's not really reflected in my stand-up, but I remember it was that time when Bill O'Reilly was kind of forced out. Like it was this dramatic shift. Like the #1 cable news personality lost his job, and I remember I was hanging out with my wife in the hospital. She was in recovery, and I was like, "So Bill O'Reilly is out," and she's like, "I haven't eaten solid food in 3 weeks. I don't really care about Bill O'Reilly." And you're like, "Yeah, you shouldn't." It's like it's just essentially gossip.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. I mean, not to jump off of or leave the story of your wife, but at a certain point, it all feels like gossip. So little of it is actually news, and it's just as they say, palace intrigue, or Trump tweeting at Graydon Carter or something, which is like the weirdest thing to be like national consumed by.
Yeah, and we fall into that trap, and it's again we have these moments of clarity where we see that it's silly, but then we're kind of caught up in the tornado of it, right?
I will say one of my favorite things that has happened with the Bill O'Reilly thing, and it just gives me such fuel and happiness, is that he now records all of his rants like from a closet in his house. And it's like he's just so desperately needs to speak into a microphone, and he's a millionaire and he doesn't. I get it if you're saying jokes and if you're writing, but to just feel like talking into a microphone about the news and saying nothing is of import, or that you have to do that. It just delights me that he does it from home now.
It's pretty fascinating, right? There's something about the Bill O'Reilly thing that also, because it's part of the cancel culture, and obviously, I don't want to blow off what attributed to him being kind of canceled. But there is also something about, I think we're in an interesting period. I'm a clean comedian. It doesn't really affect me. Some of my favorite comedians are filthy or whatever. But there is something about our culture where I feel like because I did all these international shows, and I did a show in China, and you couldn't talk about the 3 Ts. You couldn't talk about Tiananmen, Tibet, or Taiwan. And, as an American, you're like, oh, this is interesting, censorship. And I'd done a show in Turkey, and they're like, don't talk about Erdogan. And then when I was in Thailand, they're like, don't talk about the royal family. And you're like, this is so weird. And then you got to Singapore, and they're like, you can't chew gum. And you're like, well, that's weird. And then I came back to the U.S., and it's like we're in the process of going through something that I think is really interesting because, again, I don't think that there's anything wrong with adjusting how we say things so that someone's not offended. I don't think there's any, but I do think that there is like this strange cultural shift where it's weird because I don't want it to sound like, politically correct language is bad, because that's not my point. But there is something where it's weird. It's weird. Like, I'm just saying that there is something where, and maybe it's because I'm a comedian and inherently I will always be against censorship, but essentially I'm making no sense. But I'm trying to say...
It's a conversation that I have a lot. Quite
where
often.
It's like there is a, for instance, so like Being Frank, this guy who betrays two spouses and, 2 sets of children. And I did an interview, and someone was like, well, obviously I believe in polyamory, And the person was making a good point, and I'm like, but in the back of my mind, I'm going, oh, you mean the two people that are engaged in and I'm exaggerating, obviously.
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
But like, where like sensitivity, and also like, there's sometimes people that look at this and they're like, you're glorifying this, and you're like, we're losing sight. This is a silly movie,
Right.
And I feel like culturally we're moving towards this point where, and I think it's separate from, the politically correct thing. We're moving towards like where we're taking things too seriously, and there's a difference between like trying to improve things and also just kind of like, I don't know. It's almost kind of when like on Twitter, like 10 years ago, there used to be these people that would get so caught up in correcting people's grammar in kind of like not correcting it, but like in almost like an angry way, like, oh my gosh, you didn't have a comma. And you're like, you got to settle down. And I feel like that's kind of shifting into other parts of our culture. And I don't have a solution. I don't even have perfect examples outside of dealing with this film. But it's interesting. Again, it doesn't affect me, but I'm just like, there's some shift going on that I think is strange.
It's a yes and no thing, right? Or it's like, yes, I believe that we should sort of adopt new standards when it comes to how we talk and who we say, because we do want to be more inclusive in the world. But at the same time, it's also, if we are going to be inclusive, it does feel like sometimes we should be inclusive of the people who are also learning to adopt those standards and are not necessarily as far along as we'd like them to be.
Right.
Right. Like,
right.
And sometimes the offensiveness or people taking offense to everything, it's almost just part of the correction, you know?
Yeah, and but I just think that there's also like, we're adults here, right?
That's the other thing, yeah.
There's a difference between, being a narrative display of a dramatic comedy film that is telling a story of teenage angst and father-son relationship. That story does not mean an endorsement of, polygamy. You know what I mean? It's just, and that used to be so obvious, but I feel like it's drifting where,
like Taxi Driver is not an endorsement of psychopathic vigilante taxi
right.
drivers.
And by the way, it's like, I hate to sound kind of preachy about it because I don't think there's anything constructive on it, but I just think it's fascinating to witness. Like, are we getting too serious and sober?
I think, and I've gotten the rap sign a couple times, I'm sorry, but one more. I think sometimes it has to do with context, and that most people or lots of people don't know how to apply context and nuance to situations. So they're bombarded with information and new theories, and they don't really necessarily understand exactly what feminism is, or I mean, I'm just using that as an example, or how get me, or how our lives at this point have been affected by the strides that have been made through feminism, and so therefore they see it as this one idea that's been fed to them by this one news network, and then they're now applying it to all these other scenarios that are being fed to them as well via the constant news stream in their phone, but they actually don't have the applicable ideas for how it affects these things. Everyone's become like a theoretical cultural critic, but with no background in it whatsoever.
Yeah, and by the way, I think that we need to look at culture, but I think that it's like, I hope we don't get so caught up in that,
right,
that we lose sight of, we have to laugh at ourselves. Do you know what I mean? We have to, like, human beings are generally idiots.
Yes, right? That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
It's not all malicious. It's mostly idiocy. Do you know what I mean? We know that our parents are idiots, so why wouldn't we assume that we're idiots? Anyway.
Jim, this has been really fun. I love having you here. And Being Frank is a wonderful film. It is coming out today.
Yes.
It's out today. People can see it.
New York and LA.
New York and LA. Jim Gaffigan, everybody. Let's hear it.